The humidity of the city, sticky and aggressive, vanished the moment Alex Mercer crossed the threshold of Apex Solutions' glass facade. It was replaced by an air conditioning system so powerful it felt designed to preserve a body rather than cool a lobby. The building itself was a masterpiece of intimidating architecture, a monolith of mirrored glass and dark steel that thrust upward, blocking the sun and watching the street. It was the physical embodiment of corporate dominance. Alex checked his watch. 8:45 a.m. He was 15 minutes early, just as every career advice article had told him to be. He smoothed the front of his freshly pressed navy suit, took a deep breath, and walked toward the reception desk. It was an island of polished white marble. Behind it sat a woman who did not smile. "Name," she stated. It wasn't a question. "Alex Mercer. I have a 9 o'clock interview for the senior project manager position," he said, offering his best reliable and capable smile. The receptionist didn't offer hers back. She typed his name with aggressive clicks on an ergonomic keyboard, her eyes locked on the monitor. Then, slowly, she turned toward him. "Identification." Alex hesitated. "My ID? Oh, for the badge. Right." He pulled his driver's license from his wallet. She took it, and rather than just glancing at the name, she inserted it into a heavy-duty scanner that emitted a harsh, green light. The machine whined. On her monitor, a progress bar crept forward, verifying. Biometric match. Alex blinked. Standard security seemed like an understatement. She didn't return his license. Instead, she pointed to a high-definition webcam mounted on a flexible arm. "Look here." The camera clicked. Immediately, a heavy, clip-on plastic badge slid out of a dispenser near Alex's hand. It was red, not white. It had his photo, gray and grainy, and below it, in large black letters, Visitor 73. It looked less like corporate access and more like a booking photo on a booking placard. "Wait here. You will be escorted," she said, her voice monotone as she filed his driver's license into a secure locked drawer. Alex took the badge, clipped it to his lapel, and turned to the waiting area. It was an exercise in psychological discomfort. There were no padded chairs, no coffee tables covered in Forbes magazines, no soothing ambient music. Instead, a row of 3 brushed aluminum chairs, bolted to the polished concrete floor, faced the wall. The wall was blank, painted a flat, sterile white. The only sound was the high-pitched, almost undetectable hum of the air handling system. Alex sat. The metal chair was impossibly cold, its edges sharp. It was designed to keep a person from relaxing. He tried to review his prepared talking points, demonstrated leadership, conflict resolution, optimized workflows, but the silence was an active force, pressing in on his temples. He checked his watch again, 8:51. The minutes were slowing down. At exactly 9 a.m., a door that had been invisible against the white wall clicked open. A man stepped through. He wore a black suit, a thin black tie, and a wireless earpiece. He didn't offer a hand or a name. He just looked at Alex's badge, then at Alex's face. "Mercer. Follow." The escort's pace was brisk. He didn't look back. Alex was led through a maze of corridors that was a blur of gray concrete, frosted glass, and intense, shadowless fluorescent lighting. The air became colder with every corner they turned. It was eerily quiet. They passed no one. There were no open-plan offices, no break rooms, only closed, unmarked doors. Alex began to feel like he wasn't being led to an office, but deeper into a containment facility. They stopped at a door marked only with a single, black metal plate, 4B. The escort didn't knock. He waved his own security fob, and the heavy door unlatched with a loud, mechanical clack. He stepped aside and motioned for Alex to enter. The room was small, perhaps 8 by 10 feet, and utterly windowless. It contained a single, rectangular metal table, its surface scratched. Two simple, metal chairs faced each other. Above the table, a rectangular fluorescent fixture buzzed with a sound that Alex knew would eventually cause a migraine. The far wall was a massive, seamless sheet of mirror. Alex looked at his reflection, gray, anxious, and pinned against the white background. He knew, with absolute certainty, that someone was on the other side. "Wait," the escort said, then closed the door. The sound of the lock engaging was final. The click of the door mechanism echoed, and then, the high-pitched buzz of the light was the only sound in the world. Alex stood there for a moment, paralyzed. The atmosphere was so far removed from a corporate interview that he felt like he had slipped into a different reality. This was not a meeting, it was an environment optimized for control and discomfort. He was inside a classic holding cell. He considered the chair. Was he supposed to sit? Would sitting be a sign of weakness, or standing a sign of aggression? He chose to sit, facing the mirror. He folded his hands on the cold metal surface, trying to stop them from shaking. He waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. The prepared answers in his head were beginning to unravel, replaced by a growing paranoia. What did they know? What was this? Finally, exactly 20 minutes after he had entered the room, the door flew open. It slammed against the rubber bumper, the noise startling Alex so badly he jumped. A woman walked in. She was the opposite of the environment, dynamic, severe, and sharp. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that fit like armor. Her blonde hair was cut into a precise, short bob. Her eyes, an ice blue, didn't seem to see Alex so much as catalog him. She held a thick, standard, manila legal folder under her arm. She walked to the other side of the table but did not sit down. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't offer her hand. Instead, she slammed the folder onto the metal table with a deafening thwack. It was impossibly thick. It bulged. Alex recognized the corner of his own 2-page resume sticking out from the top. He saw red ink, massive and scribbled across the pages. It looked less like an annotated resume and more like a classified case file that had been flagged for immediate review. The woman planted both hands on the table and leaned in close, bringing her face inches from his. He could smell her perfume, cold, metallic, like ozone before a thunderstorm. "Let's get straight to the facts, Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice a low, lethal purr. "According to this document, you are an exemplary employee." "Too exemplary." She gestured vaguely at the file. "I want the truth." Alex swallowed, his throat dry. I'm happy to provide any information, Ms. "The name is Vance," she snapped. "But that is irrelevant." "What is relevant, Mr. Mercer, is gaps. And I see a massive one right here." She flipped open the file and stabbed her finger at his timeline. "My career path? The months between June and August 2022. Alex managed, his voice shaking. "Precisely." She leaned in even closer. "We don't believe in simple restructuring excuses at Apex, Mr. Mercer. We investigate. So, I have one question for you. And I advise you to think very, very carefully before you answer." She locked her eyes onto his, holding him captive. "Where were you, and what were you really doing, between June and August 2022? The silence that followed Ms. Vance's question was heavy enough to crush bone. The fluorescent light above them buzzed a sharp, electric zzzzt that seemed to sync with Alex's rapidly accelerating heart rate. "June to August 2022, Alex repeated, his voice sounding entirely too thin in the acoustic dead zone of room 4B. He tried to force a polite, professional chuckle, but it died in his throat. I was backpacking. Through Europe. It's on my resume, right there under the sabbatical section. TechCorp had just done a massive round of layoffs, and since I received a severance package, I took the opportunity to travel before re-entering the job market. Ms. Vance did not blink. She didn't write anything down. She simply stared at him for 3 agonizing seconds before slowly standing up to her full height. She began to pace. The sharp clicks of her heels on the concrete floor sounded like a metronome ticking down to an execution. "Backpacking," she said, testing the word on her tongue as if it were a foreign, distasteful substance. "A sabbatical. How quaint. How beautifully bohemian, Mr. Mercer." She stopped pacing and whipped around, her eyes narrowing. "Do I look like an idiot to you?" "No. Absolutely not, because only an idiot would believe that a highly driven, aggressively ambitious mid-level project manager, who had just been, let's use your word, restructured out of a fiercely competitive firm, would simply pack up a canvas sack and wander the cobblestones of Florence to find himself." Vance stepped back to the table and flipped the thick manila folder open. She bypassed the heavily red-inked resume and began pulling out glossy, high-resolution photographs. She slapped them down onto the metal table, one by one, like a blackjack dealer laying out a losing hand. Slap. A photo of Alex sitting at a cafe in Berlin, looking at his phone. Slap. A grainy, zoomed-in shot of Alex standing near a train station in Zurich, talking to a man in a gray overcoat. Slap. A printed spreadsheet of his credit card statements from July 2022, with several purchases highlighted in aggressive neon yellow. Alex felt the blood drain from his face. How did you get these? This is a massive invasion of privacy. My credit card statements. Are those drone shots? At Apex Solutions, we don't rely on self-reported narratives, Vance said coldly, ignoring his outrage. We rely on data. And the data tells a very different story from backpacking. Look at Exhibit B. She tapped the photo of him at the Zurich train station. July 14th. Zurich Hauptbahnhof. You are seen engaging with an unidentified individual for precisely 14 minutes. Zurich, Mr. Mercer. A global hub for banking and finance. Just 3 weeks after you abruptly left Tech Corp. That was a tourist asking for directions to the Kunsthaus Art Museum. Alex protested, his hands gripping the edges of the metal table. I didn't even know the answer. I had to use Google Maps for him. Is that right? Vance leaned in, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Because my analysts noted that your severance package from Tech Corp was unusually generous for a mid-level manager. Almost 50% higher than the industry standard. And then, suddenly, you're in Switzerland. Did you jump ship before the Q3 audit, Mercer? Or were you paid to look the other way while they cooked the books, and Zurich was where you secured your offshore golden parachute? I was a project manager for an app that tracked logistics for pet food deliveries. Alex nearly shouted, the absurdity of the situation finally breaking through his corporate politeness. We weren't cooking books, we were trying to optimize the routing of kibble. The severance was standard because I threatened to sue them over unpaid overtime. Aha! Vance slammed her hand flat on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. So you admit to litigious tendencies and blackmailing your former employers? No. That is not what I said. Alex was sweating now. The room was freezing, the air conditioning blasting Arctic air against his neck, but a bead of sweat rolled down his spine. He felt profoundly disoriented. He was defending perfectly normal, mundane career choices as if he were testifying before a grand jury. Vance wasn't finished. She flipped to another section of the folder, ignoring his denial. She pulled out a printed, blown-up screenshot of a LinkedIn page. Let's talk about this so-called stellar track record, she said, adopting a mockingly sweet tone. Your former supervisor, David Chen, left you a rather glowing endorsement. Let me read it for the record. She cleared her throat dramatically. Alex is a phenomenal team player who knows how to keep things moving. He operates well under the radar and always ensures the project crosses the finish line, no matter the obstacles. Vance tossed the paper onto the table in front of him. Care to translate that from corporate doublespeak into English, Mr. Mercer? Alex stared at the paper. It means I'm efficient. It means I hit my deadlines. Does it? Vance cocked an eyebrow, beginning to pace again, circling behind his chair. Alex instinctively stiffened, hating that he couldn't see her. Because to a trained eye, operates well under the radar sounds an awful lot like expert at concealing unauthorized activities. And ensures the project crosses the finish line, no matter the obstacles? That sounds like a man willing to violate compliance, bypass ethical guidelines, and perhaps even commit corporate sabotage to get results. It sounds like a fixer, Mr. Mercer. What were you fixing for David Chen? I was fixing the bugs in the user interface. Alex said, twisting in his chair to look at her. The obstacles were lazy coders and a terrible supply chain. Defensive, Vance noted aloud to no one, pulling a small silver pen from her pocket and making a single, sharp checkmark on the inside of the folder. Highly defensive when confronted with documentary evidence. Blames subordinates. Deflects responsibility. This is insane, Alex muttered, rubbing his temples. A headache was blooming right behind his eyes, directly correlated to the buzzing of the light fixture. I came here for an interview. To talk about my agile methodology certifications and my experience managing cross-functional teams. Why are you treating me like a hostile witness? Vance stopped right next to his chair. She leaned down so her mouth was inches from his ear. Because the job you are applying for, Mr. Mercer, requires absolute transparency. It requires a spine of forged steel. If you crumble because I asked a few pointed questions about your vacation photos, how are you going to handle a hostile takeover? How are you going to handle the SEC breathing down your neck while the press is outside your door? She walked back to her side of the table and sat down for the first time. She folded her hands neatly. The bad cop energy dissipated slightly, replaced by something colder, more analytical. I know about the stapler, Alex, she said softly. Alex froze. His heart actually skipped a beat. What? The Swingline 747 Classic. Die-cast metal. Matte black, she recited, her eyes boring into his soul. September 12, 2019. You packed up your desk at your first job out of college. And you took the company stapler. You didn't buy it. You requisitioned it, and then you stole it. Panic, pure and irrational, flooded Alex's system. It was true. He had taken the stapler. It was an accident. It had fallen into his box of personal effects, but he had noticed it when he got home and decided to keep it because it was a really good stapler. How could she possibly know that? Had they interviewed his old roommates? Did they have a psychological profile that predicted mild office supply theft? It was an accident, Alex whispered, feeling genuinely guilty, as if he had just confessed to a felony. It fell in my box. Petty theft, Vance stated, writing another note. Rationalization of unethical behavior. It's a stapler. It's a symptom, Mr. Mercer. Vance fired back, her voice echoing in the small room. It starts with a stapler. Then it's padding an expense report. Then it's turning a blind eye to a safety violation. Then it's a multi-million-dollar class action lawsuit that bankrupts the firm. We are looking for the rot, Alex. And I am looking right at it. Alex sat back in the cold metal chair. His breathing was shallow. He felt entirely stripped down, his professional facade shattered into a million pieces by a woman who had weaponized his own resume against him. He looked at the two-way mirror. He looked at the massive file of evidence. He looked at the woman who was currently staring at him as if he were a bug under a microscope. The pressure was suffocating. He had two choices. He could break down, apologize for the stapler, beg for the job, and try to desperately prove he was a good corporate drone. Or, he could remember who he was. Alex took a slow, deep breath, letting the freezing air fill his lungs. The panic began to recede, replaced by a slow, simmering wave of profound annoyance. The icy air of room 4B seemed to thicken, pressing against Alex's chest like a physical weight. The fluorescent light above them continued its relentless, maddening zzzt, a high-voltage soundtrack to his apparent professional execution. Across the scratched metal table, Ms. Vance sat perfectly still, her ice-blue eyes unblinking, waiting for him to crumble under the weight of a stolen Swingline 747 stapler and a manufactured conspiracy about a Swiss train station. For a terrifying, elastic moment, Alex almost did. The corporate conditioning ingrained in him since his first internship screamed at him to apologize, to grovel, to explain away the absurdity and beg for the opportunity to prove his worth. He could feel the words of submission pooling in his throat. But then, something snapped. It wasn't a loud break, it was a quiet, profound shift in his internal pressure. The panic, the sweating, the desperate need to please this terrifying woman, it all evaporated, replaced by a sudden, crystalline wave of absolute clarity. He was 32 years old. He had a master's degree, a flawless track record of delivering multi-million-dollar software projects under budget, and he had never committed corporate espionage. He was a project manager, not an international fugitive. Alex closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, took a slow, deep breath of the freezing, sterile air, and exhaled. When he opened his eyes, the fear was gone. "Ms. Vance," Alex said. His voice, previously tight and wavering, was now an absolute dead calm. It resonated in the small room, cutting through the hum of the light fixture. Vance's left eyebrow twitched a millimeter of movement. She didn't speak. Alex unclasped his hands, placing them flat and relaxed on the cold metal table. He leaned forward, closing the distance between them, meeting her predatory gaze with an unshakable, level stare. "Let's address the evidence you've so meticulously gathered," Alex began, his tone polite but laced with a newfound, sharp authority. "First, the stapler. You are correct. I took a matte black Swingline in September of 2019. It was inadvertently packed into a cardboard box by a rushed intern on my last day. When I discovered it in my apartment, I made a calculated decision: the cost of the gas and the billable hours required for me to drive back to the office, navigate security, and return a $14 piece of office equipment far outweighed the depreciated value of the asset itself. I optimized the situation. If Apex Solutions considers an accidental $14 acquisition a symptom of deep-seated corporate rot, your risk assessment matrix is fundamentally flawed." Vance's pen stopped hovering over her notepad. She simply watched him, her expression an unreadable mask. "Second," Alex continued, the momentum building in his chest, "the Zurich photograph. My unidentified individual was a bewildered American tourist from Ohio who couldn't figure out the SBB ticket machine. I helped him switch the language settings to English. I was in Switzerland because my severance from TechCorp, which I negotiated aggressively due to their failure to honor my contracted bonus structure, allowed me the financial freedom to take a hard-earned rest before my next role. It was a strategic pause to prevent burnout. A sound investment in my own human capital." He reached across the table and tapped the heavily annotated copy of his resume. "And finally, David Chen's recommendation. I operate under the radar because I do not require hand-holding, micromanagement, or public praise to do my job. I cross the finish line by eliminating bureaucratic bottlenecks, not by breaking the law. I am a project manager, Ms. Vance. My entire professional existence is dedicated to creating order out of chaos, mitigating risk, and ensuring compliance." Alex paused, letting his words hang in the freezing air. He looked at the massive, bloated manila folder of evidence, then at the two-way mirror, and finally back to Vance. "I came here today," Alex said, his voice dropping an octave, solid and resolute, "because I believed Apex Solutions was a Tier 1 logistics and management firm looking for top talent. I prepared to discuss agile methodologies, sprint cycles, and stakeholder engagement. Instead, I was treated to a psychological stress test disguised as a police interrogation. I was put in a windowless cell, subjected to surveillance photos, and accused of fraud." Alex placed his hands on the arms of the metal chair and pushed himself up. He stood to his full height, looking down at the woman in the charcoal suit. He reached up and unclipped the red Visitor 73 badge from his lapel, tossing it onto the table. It landed on the glossy photo of the Zurich train station with a sharp plastic clatter. "I don't know what kind of culture you are cultivating here at Apex," Alex said, smoothing the front of his jacket, "but a company that views its prospective employees with this level of inherent suspicion, hostility, and paranoia is not a company I trust with my career. If this is how you treat a candidate, I can only imagine how you treat your staff. Therefore, I am formally withdrawing my application for the Senior Project Manager position. I wish you the best of luck in finding whatever it is you are actually looking for." He didn't wait for a response. He turned his back on Ms. Vance, walked toward the heavy steel door, and reached out, wrapping his hand around the cold metal lever of the handle. Click. It wasn't the sound of the door unlocking. It was a sharp, mechanical click that came from directly behind him. Alex froze, his hand still on the lever. 34 minutes and 12 seconds, a voice said. The voice didn't sound like the lethal purr of the interrogator from the last half hour. It was warm. It had a lightness to it. It sounded human. Alex slowly turned around. Ms. Vance was still sitting at the table, but her entire posture had transformed. The rigid, predatory stiffness in her shoulders was gone. She was leaning back in her chair, a silver stopwatch in her hand, and on her face was a wide, genuine, and incredibly bright smile. The icy aura had completely melted. "Impressive," she said, tossing the stopwatch onto the table next to the red badge. The current record holder for this room lasted 41 minutes before he started crying. The shortest was 4 minutes. He tried to throw a chair at the mirror. Alex stood rooted to the spot, completely bewildered. I don't understand." Vance chuckled, a rich, easy sound, and stood up. She walked around the table, extending her right hand toward him. "Alex. I'm Sarah Vance, Managing Director of Operations. It is an absolute pleasure to finally meet the real you." Alex looked at her hand, then up at her face, his brain struggling to reconcile the nightmare he had just lived through with the reality unfolding in front of him. Hesitantly, he reached out and shook her hand. Her grip was firm and surprisingly warm. "What is this?" Alex asked, his voice returning to its normal cadence. "What was all of that?" "A necessary evil," Sarah sighed, gesturing to the scattered photos and the red-inked resume. "Please, sit back down. Let me explain. And I promise, I won't ask about the stapler again." Warily, Alex returned to his seat. The room still felt like a cell, but the psychological walls had suddenly dropped. "Apex Solutions," Sarah began, leaning against the edge of the table and crossing her arms comfortably, "is not a logistics firm." "Not really. That is the public-facing entity we use for recruitment and tax purposes. We are a high-tier crisis management and corporate fixer agency." Alex frowned. "Crisis management." "Exactly," she nodded. "When a Fortune 500 tech company suffers a catastrophic data breach, they call us. When a pharmaceutical CEO is caught on camera saying something highly illegal, and the SEC, the EPA, and the FBI are all racing to the lobby, they call us. We step into the burning building, take control of the narrative, manage the hostile press, negotiate with aggressive legal teams, and stop the bleeding." She picked up his resume. You applied for a senior project manager role. But we aren't hiring a project manager, Alex. We are looking for a director of crisis operations. We need someone who can walk into a boardroom full of panicking executives and take total command. We need someone who can look a federal investigator in the eye and not flinch. We need someone who, when backed into a corner with unfair accusations and overwhelming pressure, doesn't break, doesn't beg, and doesn't lose their temper. She tapped the paper. Your resume told me you were organized. Your background check told me you were clean. But paper doesn't tell me if you have a spine. Standard corporate behavioral questions tell me about a time you overcame a challenge are useless to me. Anyone can rehearse those. I needed to see your baseline under extreme, unfair duress. I needed to see if you would defend yourself using logic, or if you would collapse under authority. Alex stared at her, the pieces finally clicking into place. The cold room. The unmarked door. The bizarre surveillance photos. It was all a theatrical production designed to simulate the crushing pressure of a corporate disaster. The photos? Alex asked, pointing to the picture of Zurich. Standard background check scraped from public social media and a few purchased data broker files, Sarah admitted with an unapologetic shrug. The Zurich photo was just a lucky angle we found on a tourist's public Flickr account that happened to have you in the background. We blew it up to make it look like surveillance. The dossier is 90% blank paper to make it look intimidating. Alex let out a breath that was half laugh, half sigh of relief. And the stapler? Sarah actually grinned. Your old roommate works in our IT department. He mentioned it at a mixer. I kept it in my back pocket for the interrogation. It's usually the petty, absurd details that break people's composure. Well, Alex said, leaning back in the chair, the adrenaline finally leaving his system, leaving him feeling exhausted but strangely exhilarated. You certainly broke my composure. No, Sarah corrected him gently. I pushed you to the edge of it. And when you reached the edge, you pushed back. You analyzed the situation, dismantled my arguments, defended your integrity, and then you fired me as a potential employer because we didn't meet your ethical standards. She walked back to her side of the table, picked up the thick manila folder, and held it out to him. The starting salary for the Director of Crisis Operations is $250,000 a year, plus performance bonuses, stock options, and comprehensive benefits that include phenomenal dental, Sarah said, her eyes twinkling with amusement. You'll have a corner office with actual windows, a dedicated team of analysts, and all the free office supplies you could ever want. Alex looked at the folder. It was no longer a symbol of his impending doom, it was the key to a completely different life. A life of high stakes, intense pressure, and real challenges. It was terrifying. It was thrilling. He reached out and took the folder. When do I start? Alex asked. Monday at 8:00 a.m., Sarah said, walking over to the door and pulling it open. The buzzing of the fluorescent light suddenly seemed to fade away. And Alex? Use the main entrance next time. The receptionist will actually smile at you. 10 minutes later, Alex Mercer stepped out of the glass and steel monolith of Apex Solutions. The sticky, aggressive heat of the city hit him like a physical blow, but after the freezing confines of room 4B, it felt absolutely glorious. He stood on the sidewalk, the thick manila folder tucked safely under his arm, and looked up at the towering mirrored facade. He had walked in as an average candidate hoping to manage spreadsheets. He was walking out as a corporate fixer, a director for the shadow ops of the business world. He took a deep breath of the city air, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. He survived the interrogation. Now, he just had to survive the job.